Everyone. Welcome to today's Haiku Partner Masters. These are a series of webinars and discussions that we do for exclusively to our partners. So if you're in this conversation, you're on the call with us, we thank you for your partnership. We're a channel first company and we always appreciate when our partners join. One of the things that we're driving here is making sure that you're aware of Haiku's portfolio and the challenges that we're solving in the market outside of the world of Nutanix, even outside of traditional infrastructure. So I'm super excited about today's Partner Masters because it's about building a channel SaaS offering, not only for Microsoft 365, but also for the entire technology stack or the data estate of an organization. For those who are wondering, this session will be recorded. It will be available in the partner portal. You will receive the slides, and of course, you will receive everything you need to activate this offering as well. As far as those who are joining us today, my name is Andy Fernandez. I'm the Senior Director of Product Marketing. We're also joined by Ashish Rao, who's the Senior Product Marketing Manager, who's very focused within our Microsoft offerings, specifically Microsoft 365. And we're joined by Kyle Taylor on the channel account management side. Kyle, you're kind of the star of the show here on the channel side. Would you tell us a little bit about yourself for those channel partners who are newer to Haiku? Who is Kyle Taylor?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Well, thank everyone for joining today. I'm Kyle Taylor, based out of Chicago, and I manage the North American channel here at Haiku. I work closely with our ecosystem partners every day to kind of identify new revenue opportunities, accelerate deal cycles, and win more business through Haiku's purpose-built multi-cloud backup and recovery. And today you're in for a treat because Andy and team are going to share with you how we're changing the game with our M365 backups. Andy, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Kyle. And if you have any questions or comments, leverage the Q&A function that you have in your Zoom panel. If we see a question pop up live, we'll make sure to answer it. We're also going to spend some time at the end reviewing all questions and making sure. If for some reason we have a ton of questions that come in, we will make sure to email directly Kyle and myself to make sure that we address any questions or double clicks that you want to have on the matter today. For those who maybe are a brand new Haiku partner, we consider ourselves, and we are a focused in our mission-based company for universal data protection. We have over 4,600 organizations that we protect that trust us with the crown jewels of their organization. We do so across 78 countries, but most importantly, we do so explicitly through our channel partners. We are a channel first company, and we always continue and strive to grow our customer base via and in collaboration with our channel partners as well. But what I want to focus on now is really break down what we've observed. Every single day, we're talking to customers of all shapes and sizes across all verticals and geos. And what's become very apparent, not only through research, but also through anecdotal evidence, is that the IT and data landscape is fundamentally changing, not only in the technology stack that people are using in their daily lives, but also specifically how that affects channel partners. So we've identified three major changes in the IT channel. The first one is very obvious to everyone on this call. Most of our partners have a very, very strong infrastructure offering, many of them coming from the world of VMware. But as we all know, the elephant in the room, there's been a very drastic change within the VMware ecosystem. And although VMware offers an incredible platform, very, very mature in the hypervisor space, there are some pricing and licensing changes within VCF that have made those economics very difficult for customers. Now, probably when this all happened, I believe nearly 2 years ago, most folks saying, look, everyone's leaving VMware. And that wasn't the case. The case was most people renewed because they couldn't afford to come off VMware immediately. But what we're observing now is that folks are actively looking at moving their infrastructure, at whether they're evaluating Nutanix, whether they're evaluating other hyperconverged infrastructure, and even the economics of lift and shift are much more reasonable today than they were 3-4 years ago. So what does this mean? Well, it means that there's never been a more mobile time for customers looking to manage their infrastructure elsewhere. And it's not going to be a zero-sum game. It's not simply saying we were a VMware shop and now we are a Azure Stack shop or a Nutanix shop or a Hyper-V shop. What we're going to see is organizations are going to move over some critical services. And then you're also going to see an even larger increase in the cloud adoption rates. Why? Cloud economics have changed. And in fact, when you think about how organizations have adopted cloud, what you saw at the beginning was the lift and shift. I would leverage potentially cloud targets for DR, for low cost, efficient storage that I don't have to manage on-prem. But what we're seeing now is those organizations that lifted and shifted are actually modernizing fully. What does that actually mean? Well, it means that they are refactoring or completely starting from scratch and leveraging PaaS, database as a service, and of course, infrastructure as a service. And the market shows that when you look at IT spend, when you look at public cloud spend, it is growing. It is growing consistently despite the sizes that we're seeing already in these organizations. So what we've seen so far is it's not going to be a zero-sum move from VMware to another platform. You're going to see organizations adopt a multi-cloud strategy. And for today's conversation, we've also observed an explosion of SaaS. By 2028, SaaS will account for 40% of public cloud services market. The average organization that we see today, and when we say average mid-sized organization, we're talking between 1,000 and 5,000 employees. They're using over 217 SaaS applications. Just to get this presentation done, to share it, to broadcast with you, we've had to use 3 to 4 SaaS applications today. Microsoft 365 and that suite being one of them. But the point here is that this is a very dynamic market, and we're seeing an incredible opportunity. This is something that HYCU's called from the beginning in the SaaS market, and we want to make sure that our partners are able to address and capture this growth as well. But there's a very specific statistic here that to me resonates very well and shows you where the market is. 60% of corporate data today lives in the cloud. 60% of corporate data today lives in the cloud. When you think about how we got here, it's been a very slow and then a very sudden transition. So what you saw was, 20 years ago, organizations, they lived in a castle. IT manager, the CIO, they had a castle. That was their data center. Every single business application was running inside of a data center. That means that you had full control of the storage, full control of the economics, full control of the data protection of these applications as well. And when you start to see over the last few years, you started to see kind of the first few major SaaS applications come to market, whether that was Salesforce, whether that was M365. And you also started to see edge cases within the public cloud. And around 5 years ago, more organizations started adopting SaaS applications at a very high rate. No longer were they hosting things as server or data center deployments. But you also started to see the birth of PaaS, whether that was containerized applications, critical security services, database as a services, or even data warehouses. Organizations started to radically shift over to cloud. And today, where we sit today, is in SaaS as well. So of course, there's still an on-prem footprint, but it's never going away for organizations. But they are leveraging public cloud. They're modernizing in public cloud, and they have exploded in their use of SaaS. The majority of the business applications used today in commercial organizations are no longer hosted as server or data center. They are consumed as a service, whether it's Microsoft 365 like we're talking about today, or Git repo and GitHub, collaboration tooling, how you host a website. Everything is consumed as a SaaS. It is the new business model. It is how people start companies, and that is not going to go away. And when you think about the spend, specifically in the Americas and EMEA, by 2028, the cloud services market is going to reach $1.2 trillion. And remember, SaaS makes up over 40% of that. So if you think about organizations voting with their wallet, they are showing that cloud and SaaS are real. And that's going to shift as well, where budget centers for backup and recovery will be as well. Why? Well, in the last few years, what we've noticed was organizations adopted SaaS like this. Just like every new technology comes around, you get pressure to adopt them, whether it's pressure internally from your board or from a vendor, and organizations adopted. And they no longer saw their SaaS applications that they hosted because they subscribed to it. They even maybe leverage a credit card or leverage you as a partner to purchase something like Microsoft 365. But then what happens? Well, this concept of the shared responsibility model wasn't known very well. And organizations started losing data. Whether there was an insider threat or a deletion, they find out way too late that they're actually responsible for this. Whether that's M365, and everyone's fully aware on this call of the shared responsibility model, that same model applies to every SaaS and cloud applications. And every week, we see scenarios of disastrous data loss, whether it's an organization leveraging Google, or an insider threat within GitHub deleting all the IP, or even somebody exploiting M365 tenant as well. Because there's been so many cases of data loss, so many compliance violations, organizations have realized that they need backup and recovery. And the M365 backup market is very mature. There's over 90 competitors out there. Over 90 vendors provide M365 backup. But what we're seeing is that it's no longer just M365 backup that people are allocating budget to. It's going to be across all SaaS applications. So when we think about how not only total spend in IT shifting towards cloud and SaaS, so is going to be the backup budget center as well. And by 2028, 75% of these enterprises are going to prioritize the backup of SaaS applications. This is going to be a massive shift, a massive hockey stick towards SaaS backup spend. It's really important to understand how to capture that within your organization. So for today's webinar and today's discussion points, there's three things that we're going to talk about. The first thing that we're going to talk about is what you probably already have an offering within today, which is Microsoft 365. We're going to talk about HYCU's innovation, what we've done in the last few months to actually help customers get more control and freedom, and more importantly, lower TCO within 365. We're then going to talk about all the adjacency and all the services that organizations need to really protect alongside Microsoft 365. And we're going to double click on Entra ID. And then, of course, we're talking about expanding SaaS backup offerings and how do you address and capture revenue in an addressable market. And the reason we're so focused on having this conversation is because with every application that moves away from the customer's data center to an as-a-service deployment, it's most likely that they're not transacting this through the partner. It's most likely that somebody within the sales team is actually the one buying all these new services. And they're not being transacted through IT. They're not even being paid for by IT. And they're not always going through a partner. And especially as you look at to this across sales, marketing, and engineering SaaS, they are not going through partners. It's very important to understand how HYCU can help you address that, gain that account visibility, but also make sure that there's revenue being driven across the entire technology stack, not just VMware, Nutanix, and everything that they're leveraging within their hypervisor. So with that, let's talk a little bit about Microsoft 365. This goes without saying, everyone on this call is fully aware of the value, but this market continues to grow. Microsoft 365 has over 400 million subscribers, and it's used across email, communication, knowledge management, task management, but also from a files perspective. I'd say that's probably where the most critical data is. And this is the heartbeat of an organization. In the world of a data center, we think historically around tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 applications, right? Because these are VMs that are touching prod, and tier 1s are the ones that you really have to protect. But in the world of SaaS and cloud is a little different. And when you think about the impact of M365 going down or that data being lost, it's not just the risk of compliance. It's not just the risk of an insider threat. It's the fact that your entire business can freeze. How you speak to customers, how you speak to partners, how you store their data, even POs. This is all stored in M365. And it's the heartbeat of your organization. But what I mentioned at the beginning, though, was, well, Andy, there's 90 competitors out there. I'm probably, as a partner, using HYCU from a Nutanix perspective and a couple other services, but I actually have somebody else from an M365 perspective. Now, there are over 90 competitors. It's an extremely saturated market, but the market has changed. Customer requirements has changed, and we want to talk specifically on a couple key areas. But Ashish, you live in this world. You've observed and you've done your analysis as we continue to expand our M365 offering. Talk to me a little bit about when customers today in 2025 have to choose a solution, what are the 5 things that they should be looking for, and why does this matter?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Andy. So I think from our learnings, what we've sort of realized and understood by working with so many different customers and partners is one, of course, the most important thing would be to get the right coverage. As Andy was mentioning, M365 has a lot of data. It could be from your communication to collaboration, all your files, your emails, contacts, calendars, to your tasks and your notes, all of it, right? So of course, having the right coverage is very critical because you need to ensure that you're covering and backing up and ensuring that it's recoverable, the entire end-to-end aspect of M365, right? And the second thing, which we are going to focus on in this discussion a lot today, is the aspect of control and ownership of data, right? And as Andy mentioned, there are about 90 plus vendors out there today, right? But what a lot of them lack today is the ability to give the control, or give the ownership of the data back to the customer. And that's a very, very critical point, because that's a lot of sensitive data. It's a lot of important data that customers have on M365. So maintaining the control and ownership of that data is super critical, and that's something that we've been working towards. But that's again a very, very critical point in choosing the right solution. And of course, the immutability aspect, ensuring that the data is completely ransomware proof and safe from attacks, and it's easily and confidently recoverable from the backups, right? And of course, as Andy was also mentioning, it doesn't stop at M365, right? There's so much out there today. Customers use hundreds of different applications. So backing all of it up, ensuring that all of the data out there is protected and safe, is something that's very important. And lastly, most importantly, is the total cost of ownership, right? Whatever said and done, at the end of the day, what matters really is being able to optimize the costs and being able to ensure that from a storage perspective, from the backup itself, everything should be optimized from a cost perspective.
No, thank you, Ashish. That's a good breakdown. I think what we've noticed as well is when you look at the competitive space within M365, over 95% of these vendors offer simply a managed storage, basically telling the customer, look, we'll store this for you. And although that seems convenient at the beginning, it's really a means of control. The customer and you as a partner cannot really dictate the cost. You can't dictate the total cost of ownership, and you can't even dictate the immutability options that customers need. So what became very important and to HYCU is, can we give customers the ability to actually store this data themselves in their control? They define the residency. They have full control of this data, which means they also have control of the economics of the data as well. So Ashish, we're going to walk into it for a second, but one thing that I wanted to talk about for folks who are thinking, I've been a HYCU partner for years now, and they are a solution that was purpose-built for Nutanix, and they delivered incredible value. But where has HYCU been in the last few years? What have we been working on, and what do we drive? Something that I want to mention here is HYCU R Cloud. That is our platform. That is what customers are using today. It's actually short for Resiliency Cloud. And our focus is to help customers take back their data, have full control across the entire data estate. And before we double click on M365, this is what the platform looks like. It's very different from a few years ago. And because of our use in our development platform, we've been able to give customers full coverage. For today's conversation, that's what I'm going to talk about. Full coverage. Not only their core infrastructure or cloud services, but full coverage of their SaaS applications. And we're going to start that conversation today within Microsoft 365. This is the key focus. We're going to talk about 365 and the freedom and control that we give, but also the fact that customers actually have one single platform that they can trust on, and that you as a partner actually have one platform that you can recommend to protect a company's entire data estate. But Ashish, walk me through HYCU's integration and HYCU's solution around Microsoft 365. What were some of the recent announcements, and what are the key elements that we focus on for customers today?
Yeah. So I think some of the recent things we've worked on based on the learnings we've had, one and most importantly, is giving the control back to the customers, right? So complete control and freedom over their own data, their storage, where they want to store it, how they want to store it. It's completely up to the customers, right? As opposed to today, the way it's being done, where they're at the mercy of the vendor, right? The way they store it, whatever options that's available to them. So that's one of the key things that we've worked on in the recent updates. And the second one would be the immutability aspect, where as opposed to typically again how platforms work today is that they have a soft lock or an API level lock. But what we've done is we've actually ensured true immutability of these backups by ensuring that they're locked at a storage level using object lock, which would mean that come what may, these cannot be tampered with, these cannot be touched at all until the retention is hit, right? So unlike other case where it can be overridden by an admin or if somebody gets access, right? The other thing is, of course, the flexibility, ensuring that, again, everybody wants to handle their backups and restores in a different way, right? They want different frequencies, different retentions, different storage options. So there's definitely a lot of difference in the requirements and the expectations that we've seen from customers, and which is why the flexibility aspect becomes really important, because we're just letting it open and we're just letting customers dictate how they want to run this and how they want to manage this, right? And of course, the comprehensive protection along with Microsoft 365 is these are some of the updates we've been working on.
No, Ashish, that makes total sense. When a customer is able to decouple the backups from a managed storage, they all of a sudden have so many options. Options in regard to, well, what kind of storage target do I want? What are some of the security capabilities that I need? How long do I want to keep this data? Maybe I want to keep it for a lot longer because I can finally afford it. But it's very, very critical to understand that, out of all the 90 vendors, very, very few, maybe less than a handful, are able to actually provide customer-owned backups in their environment. And it's for those who saw us at Dell Technologies World, we're also the only ones who can actually store M365 backups onto Dell data domain as well. And we have other sessions where we'll cover that as well. But Ashish, obviously this is a market where there are a lot of incredible solutions out there, and they provide policy-based backups. They have interesting approaches to search and recovery. But let's kind of give me the bird's eye view of our capabilities here, but let's double click on some of the more unique differentiators, especially when we talk about offline recovery as well.
Yeah, of course. So one of the key things, as I had mentioned earlier, is the aspect of flexibility, right? So right from setting up policies the way you want, the way customers want, to flexible retention, where they can keep the data literally forever, or even from even a few weeks if they want, right? So that's completely in their hands. To exactly finding and recovering the precise the data that they require and they want to restore. To again complete offsite export of all of the data. It could be the entire tenant, it could be just a single file and attachment, whatever they want, right? So the common theme across this is the flexibility aspect, as I was mentioning, where customers have complete control from setting up backups within a few minutes to setting up how they run, what they want to restore, and how they want to export it if they really need to. Especially in the cases where the Microsoft service is down, these exports become really critical, because you'd want to immediately get the critical files exported to your own storage, the customer's own storage, and get things going until the service is up. So I think that's in a bird's eye view, Andy. That's how I would look at it. Yeah.
That's very helpful, Ashish. And for those, maybe I saw a couple of people join, one of the problem statements that we drove at the beginning was there is no real ransomware when it comes to SaaS. There's just kind of buzzwords and jargon that are being used where, on-prem, you can have your VMware or your VM infrastructure encrypted and you have to have a way to recover. But in SaaS, it's a lot murkier. It's not necessarily that somebody's encrypting your SaaS data or your tenant. It's that you have so many other different ways of exploiting your data, of getting locked out of your account. But one of the top threats that should be top of mind is actually somebody going after your vendor. We've seen so many times where the vendors themselves, either they make a mistake and there's a supply chain compromise, exactly what we saw within CrowdStrike, or there's actual attack. So for example, what happened with Snowflakes, where over 90 enterprise customers lost an incredible amount of data because of an attack. So it's not just thinking about, well, what happens if I make a mistake or there's a bad actor that comes about for me. In SaaS and M365, you have to think about, what if somebody comes for the vendor? What if somebody's successful? We know they're trying every single day. They only have to be successful once. And you have to make sure that if or when that happens, you have access to that data outside of the platform. You have access to that data that you can read that is compliant. But Ashish, let's talk a little bit more on the economic side of the house, right? If as a vendor offering managed backup for M365, there's sometimes premiums that are involved for customers. Walk me through that dynamic and the value of choosing your own preferred storage, and what does that sovereignty look like when you're using HYCU to protect M365 now?
Yeah. So this sort of ties in with the whole overarching concept of our discussion, is about the whole control and ownership, right? Essentially, customers will be able to define exactly where they want to store it and under what conditions they want to store it, right? Which gives them access, they can choose from let's say, Amazon S3 to Azure Blob Storage, GCP, or as you also mentioned, Dell. So we are actually the only solution that can integrate with Dell DDVE to back up their M365 or other cloud, other data back to Dell DDVE, right? And that essentially saves a lot of your costs because there's advanced deduplication and compression that you can leverage, that customers can leverage, right? So the other point is, of course, when it comes to the premium storage, which is included with some sort of a bundle storage that vendors offer today. Usually, again, usually if customers are having their own storage, they have complete control over the storage class, the way they want to handle it, right? But vendors typically are going to add a premium to it because that's not something they're going to give away for free, right? So essentially, customers end up paying some sort of a premium, which could be up to like 500% of the premium on storage, which otherwise can be directly controlled by customers, directly defined by customers, and they can also have complete control over the cost of it as well, right? They can precisely identify how they want to do it and how they want to save their costs, right? So again, tying it up with vendor storage will definitely attract a lot of premium costs to the whole storage aspect. And of course, as we discussed, it will give you it's limited in terms of the sovereignty, the governance, and the residency aspect because you do not have complete control over how it's stored, where it's stored, and under what conditions, right? But when it's your own storage, you have complete control. Whatever region you want to store it in, your replications, the way you architect the entire storage is completely up to the customer. So they have total control over cost, total control over data, and total control over all the regulatory aspects that they need to keep in mind.
Ashish, that's very helpful. And when you think about, from the partner perspective, before you would be able to resell M365 and resell it to an end user, but that's it. You could resell the license. When you're decoupling the backups of the vendor backups from the storage, the customer can choose where that data goes. They can choose the tiers. They can choose everything. And from a partner perspective, you have the ability, especially if you're a Dell partner or an AWS partner, you have the ability to merge these worlds now. And be able to say, look, this is the storage target that we recommend for you. This is what could potentially reduce your TCO or introduce new cybersecurity capabilities for your data as well. So it's about having not only choice for the end user, but choice for you as the partner. One simple thing to cover here, though, before we continue diving into this, it's actually the concept of the 3-2-1 rule. This is something that on-prem we're all fully aware of, and we talk about and preach every single day. But when we went to class, to SaaS, we all forgot about the 3-2-1 rule. Customers we see all the time who have such stringent capabilities and guidance on-prem, they don't have it for SaaS. Ashish, walk us through the rule and walk us through what customers can do with HYCU today for M365.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, Andy, to align with the whole 3-2-1 rule in terms of backup, so what HYCU offers its customers is the ability to have multiple copies in different locations and with the immutability as well, which essentially means that at least one of your copies will be mutable, and that's something that you can safely, securely restore from while having multiple copies across different storage. So you could have one primary in an AWS, the secondary in an Azure, and your archives in something like a GCP or a Wasabi, right? So that essentially ensures that your customers are following the best practice, and that of course it's completely truly immutable, which they just don't have to worry about in case they're having a ransomware attack or any other attack. And of course, there are other things that come into the picture when we're looking at security as a whole. On HYCU, we ensure that the backup and recovery operations are very, very tightly secure as well. So there are capabilities like SSO integrations, multi-factor authentications, and role-based access controls to ensure that the access to HYCU as a platform is also highly secure and closed off.
Perfect. Thank you, Ashish. And now let's transition over to not just having a conversation about how to deliver services and value add within M365, but to actually do so for the entire Microsoft stack with HYCU. And we're going to touch on a couple of these as examples, but at HYCU, we have a very broad coverage of the Microsoft ecosystem, whether it is being able to protect Azure Stack HCI or even upcoming soon for partners only Hyper-V, but also being able to protect modern infrastructure within Azure, For example, not only just VMs or databases, but also even blob storage, but also SaaS applications that are owned by Microsoft. So for example, Entra ID, which we'll touch on, but also GitHub. Just think about GitHub for a second. That is where all of the IP in an organization lives. All of the IP. How does my product work? Even how am I storing configurations? That all lives in GitHub, and it is a prime target for cyber attackers. So it's very important that we touch on all of these, but let's discuss Entra ID for a second. What we've noticed, and I mean, I'm sure in the audience, many folks have actually had a full understanding of privilege escalations and how organizations are actually going after misconfigurations, whether it's Okta or Entra ID, finding mistakes, and being able to attack an organization in a very brutal manner. We'll grab MGM for example. MGM took $100 million hit because somebody was able to drive a privilege escalation of their identity access management configurations. Not only did they take a hit initially around the disruption and the downtime, but they've also had to rebuild their entire access management. We are talking about months of work with very expensive specialists to be able to rebuild these environments. We've even seen scenarios where the vendor themselves misconfigures the customer's configurations and they have to start all over. So when you talk about IAM, especially Entra ID, which is used with every single Microsoft 365 deployment, it's very critical to actually have a conversation around backup, believe it or not, for Entra ID. And in fact, just last year, we have a new survey coming out, hopefully very soon, is the fact that in our State of SaaS survey, we found that 75% of these organizations realized that there was any change in their configurations, it would be meaningfully impacted. Whether it's somebody internally, an intern cleaned up the wrong policies and made a bunch of deletions, or the vendor themselves deleted their access configurations, they found that this was an incredibly large risk within the organization. And think about it. And Ashish knows this super well. Entra ID holds the keys to the kingdom. It is your front door. It is what communicates not only with your on-prem applications, not only with your business applications like M365, but also with devices, with public cloud infrastructure. If you gain access and you escalate through Entra ID, the organization is in trouble. And if you're not able to quickly recover these configurations, you are in for, the customer is in for a very, very bad ride. So it's very important to actually think about being able to sell and deliver Entra ID backup to customers already using M365 today, because it's as critical, if not more, than the data in 365. Ashish, walk us through our capabilities and what does that look like for a customer who's not only protecting M365, but also Entra ID with HYCU.
Yeah. So, in fact, actually, in Entra ID, HYCU's got one of the most comprehensive coverages in terms of the protection for it, because we do identify and we do understand that Entra ID in its own is a super critical piece of information and data, which needs to be backed up because, as you rightly said, it holds the keys to the kingdom, right? So of course, in terms of the coverage, everything from the users to policies, to groups, roles, applications, everything. We have a very wide coverage in terms of objects that can be backed up and restored. And all that we had discussed here in terms of, automating these backups from, having unlimited attention, having customer-owned storage, and the ransomware aspect of it, all of it applies to Entra ID as well, because those are capabilities that HYCU has as a platform, which extends to all the different modules and solutions that we cover today. So yeah, essentially, yeah, from the whole coverage aspect and from all the different things that we discussed today, all of it would apply to Entra ID as well, and customers would be able to within just a single click be able to restore or even do cross instance recoveries with HYCU on Entra ID.
Ashish, that's very helpful. And what we found too is that many organizations aren't just using Entra ID, they're actually using a combination with a service like Okta as well. And we're able to protect both of those access management organizations in a very, very deep and profound way. One last thing that I'm going to touch on, because we've talked about the cloud and SaaS market that continues to grow. M365 and Entra ID, even GitHub, this is a fraction of the total SaaS estate. It is a fraction of the estate. It's already a very large and mature backup market, but it is a fraction of their data estate. And when you have organizations that you're already delivering M365 backup, you have kind of these degrees of separation that start to build and potentials to be able to protect much more of the data estate, because every single one of these applications are super critical to an organization. And they need to think about backup and recovery in a very serious way. And when you're able to leverage a backup vendor in a platform like HYCU that has over 86 workloads, you have the ability to go in and not only introduce M365 or Entra ID, but start to protect the entire data estate, gaining account visibility, offering services, offering value to say, look, not only are we protecting your repos or even your cloud infrastructure, or even applications like DocuSign that people only think about backup until something very, very bad happens. These are all critical. Files stored in Box. These are all critical data. And with HYCU, you can drive tremendous expansion opportunity with SaaS backup as well. What I love about this is kind of our own internal joke. Is this is our data of protection elements, or table of data protection elements. And what it shows you is that when you look at an entire data estate, there's so many different applications and technology stacks that are being used. In order to protect this, which by the way, 20 years ago, all of this lived in a data center. Today, they're all in different silos and require individual backup offerings for it. We're able to protect the entire data estate. So with that, while I monitor for questions, Kyle, could you kind of run us through, if you're a partner who maybe has done a couple of deals with HYCU or is starting to get to know the technology a little bit more, what do you recommend? What are some of the resources out there? And then we'll address questions at the end.
Yeah. First and foremost, I'd recommend signing up for the partner portal, right? It has access to decks like we presented today, decks on other SaaS applications that we cover, other decks on just HYCU in general, right? So a lot of digital resources that you need in your day-to-day when you're talking to your end users. If you don't want to kind of call us in as a resource, you can also check MDF, registered deals. So the first place I would start would be that partner portal. And as an example, the other two QR codes you have for the data sheets. You can find many other data sheets there on the partner portal, right? That's kind of your one-stop shop for all things HYCU.
Thank you so much, Kyle. We have a very large group of questions. I know we have a time limit on the webinar. Folks like Matt, Ibnu, and I'm going to follow up with the answers to this in an email very shortly. There are an incredible amount of questions here, so I want to be able to address them each and every single one. So you'll be expecting within the hour an email around your questions. But please, I'm going to give everyone a few seconds to scan the QR code. All of this can be found in the partner portal. But we want to thank you so much for your time, for your attention today, and of course for your partnership. And we're excited to continue this as well. Thank you all so much, and we hope you have a wonderful day.